Hey guys, I'll be super. Hello, I'm the ahbeef, and I'm here with my good pal Haedox. How you doing, Haedox?
I'm having a lot of fun with my pal ahbeef.
Well, you ready to do some reviews, Haedox?
I'm better than you are, so I should do the review.
Alright, well, Haedox is gonna do the review.
You can shut up now. I'm always on duty, and I love Wario. Wario is one of the hottest Italian men I can think of. I would love it if Wario put his brown bricks in my...
Okay, alright, let's just start the review. We don't want to derail this video before the game derails us. Anyway, here's Wario Master of Disguise for the Nintendo DS.
As usual, we'll start the review off with the plot, and it's actually very involved. I was really surprised by just how integrated the story is into this game. This isn't like the Wario Land games where you just get a cutscene at the beginning and the end of the game. There are multiple long cutscenes with lots of dialogue throughout the whole game. Fortunately, however, the story itself is pretty good, so I never really minded the abundance of long cutscenes.
The first of these long cutscenes shows Wario watching TV when something called the Silver Zephyr cuts in from a commercial. The show features a master thief attempting to ransack a ship for some treasure, so Wario gets the idea to make an invention to teleport himself into the TV show, hoping he can steal the treasure for himself. Stinky Onion Man TM creates the Telmet TM and crash lands into the show right on top of the Silver Zephyr's head. Knocked unconscious, the Silver Zephyr drops his wand Good Style, and when Wario waves it around, Good Style claims Wario as his new owner. With it, Wario makes himself a new disguise as a thief to invade the ship and steal all the treasure before Count Cannoli, Wario's new rival. From there, Wario and Good Style go around looking for more treasure until they discover a piece of the Wish Stone, an ancient rock that is said to grant a wish to anyone who finds it. However, it's been split up into 5 pieces, so the duo goes hunting for the rest of them, hoping to put them all together and wish for every treasure in the world. Along the way, Wario style, their ship name, meets some other characters such as Carpaccio, a dazzling man from Cannoli's rivaling family, and Tiramisu, who, charmed by Wario's bravery, helps him on his adventure.
The story constantly has everyone all racing for different pieces of the Wish Stone at once, and it's pretty engaging watching all of it unfold. Helping the interesting plot is some pretty funny dialogue that got some genuine laughs out of me on multiple occasions. Not every joke is a winner, some of them do just amount to, haha, Wario stinky, he farted. But none of it ever came across as forced or unfunny to me, and the fact that there were some genuinely hilarious moments more than makes up for that. Not only that, but the characters are great too. Wario is great with his better-than-you attitude. I absolutely love how confident he is in this game. It's a great trait for the player's character to have. He constantly insults his rivals, and he never backs down from a challenge, and the back and forths are always a blast to watch. Count Cannoli is easily my favorite character in the game. He's fairly fleshed out and actually goes through a character arc, which is more than I can say for anyone across the entire Wario Land series. He starts off trying to get his wand back from Wario. He tries bartering with him, tricking him, beating him up and taking it from him, and he even tried partnering with Carpaccio to take him down. Without Good Style, Cannoli can't transform into the Silver Zephyr. Without his disguise, he can't be a thief, so he tries everything he can to get Good Style back. After losing to Wario time after time, he starts to doubt himself and wonder if he's worthy of being a Master Thief at all. Towards the end of the game, his plan to team up with Carpaccio fails, and Carpaccio kicks him to the curb to chase after the last piece of the Wish Stone by himself. Cannoli then comes to terms with the situation and decides to help Wario stop Cannoli by bringing him to the Fantastic Garden where the last piece of the Wish Stone is hidden. He even shows up to help again later by saving Wario and Cannoli from the evil demon Tiramisu, who comes from a pretty decent plot twist. Once the Wish Stone pieces are all put together, Tiramisu reveals her true form, the ancient demon Tiramisu. Good Style then reads the full story from the Wish Stone. A pharaoh from thousands of years ago summoned a demon to grant him a wish, but in return the demon asked him to starve his people. When they were all weakened, instead of granting his wish, the demon ate all his people's souls and sunk him and the pyramid under the ground. Some years later, a man crossed the desert and sweet-talked the demon so he could trap her in a stone and split it into 5 pieces. It's a pretty good twist, or at least it would be if it weren't for one little problem, being Tiramisu herself. The way she's introduced and the way the twist is set up unfortunately makes it a bit obvious. Tiramisu just kinda shows up out of nowhere at the beginning of episode 7, and you can tell the entire time there's something fishy going on with her, so I could pretty much tell instantly that she would be the final boss. If Tiramisu had been set up better, the twist would have been a lot more surprising, but at least having the whole backstory revealed is a nice payoff. Despite that one issue, I think the story is fantastic, with some great writing, interesting characters, genuinely funny jokes and dialogue, and an engaging plot that keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. At first I wasn't fully invested in it, so the long cutscenes were a bit boring, but after a couple levels I got more into it and started to really enjoy the story, and I'd say it's one of my favorite aspects of the entire game. On top of all that, every cutscene can be skipped, so for repeat playthroughs or those who just aren't interested in the story, that's still an option. Though I would heavily recommend against doing this if you're gonna play this game.
I'm kinda glad I followed ahbeef's advice because the story was by far the most interesting part of the experience. It's what kept me going through the trials and tribulations Wario would present to me like the smelly onion-eating lad he is. Well, that and the presentation. Now personally, I loved the sprite work in Master of Disguise. It's super well done and vibrant, from the environments down to the assortment of disguises Wario wears. Speaking of Wario, damn, he's thick and looks stunning on the DS. On the GBA, I still love the art style, but here it's been significantly fine-tuned. Idle animations give off that classic Wario charm that makes the series so damn special. Sure, some of the cutscenes could have been more animated to further add some flair during the often long and static exchanges, but what's here is fine already.
I'd have to agree completely. Master of Disguise is a gorgeous game, but I do have a few minor nitpicks. Similarly to Wario Land Shake It, I found the visual variety to be a bit underwhelming when compared to Wario Land 4. Now, Master of Disguise's environments still look fine on their own. There's a museum with a bunch of weird exhibits in the background, a floral labyrinth with some weird ancient-looking architecture, and a level where you swim around inside an active volcano. But 2 levels take place on a pirate ship and 2 more inside of a pyramid, so there definitely could have been a little bit more variety to keep things interesting, especially since the levels already go on for so long. Another small grievance I have is the cutscene presentation. They already go on for pretty long, and while the dialogue is entertaining, visually they can be a bit static. Often characters will just stand still with these very bland-looking text boxes going by. It's not a game that Haedox likes get owned libtard. Levels of painfully boring or anything. You can speed up the text boxes or just skip the cutscenes altogether, but as is, they could stand to have a bit more animation to keep them more interesting. To move on to something a bit more positive, the music is fantastic. I especially love the themes for episodes 3, 9, and 10, and the boss themes are among my favorites of all time. Every one of them is fast-paced, energetic, and feel like they're begging for a hard rock remix. I'd love to see a remixed boss theme medley in the next Smash Bros. Game. Not every song is a banger, but I think the closest any of them get to annoying is the theme that plays on the menu in between levels.
It's the same 2 fucking measures played over and over and over again on a compressed piano while some baby instruments have some licks in the background. See, there's also cymbal crashes like every measure too, and since the main driving progression is so loud and compressed, it's just jarring. I understand loops and menus are loops, but fucking hell, just add like 2 more measures or whatever, Kinji Hitaka. But like ahbeef said, the other music in the DS sound font is great. The sound effects too are wonderful. Hearing Wario's voice in that awfully compressed speaker just peels my onions. Though, to be fair, that's more of an issue of hardware than it is to pin on the game, so I can give it a pass for now.
What many people might not be able to give a pass are the controls, which, like many DS titles, uses the system's touch innovation to spice up the gameplay. On the surface, they're fairly simple. You use left and right on the D-pad to move, down to crouch, and up to jump, and the face buttons are laid out in the same way for left-handed players. You use your other hand on the touchscreen to perform every other action in the game. Things like attacking, switching between disguises, and opening chests are all relegated to touch controls, and while that sounds very off-putting, I personally got used to it very quickly and had very few problems. I play the game through Wii U Virtual Console, and functionally it approximates playing on original hardware fairly well despite the gamepad's larger size. My longer play sessions did leave me feeling a little cramped, so if you're interested in the game, I'd recommend getting a cartridge, but the Wii U version is fine as well. With that said, I found the controls to be pretty responsive and even fun to use at times. Each of Wario's disguises are activated by drawing a pattern on Wario's body, such as a checkmark for Thief Wario and a magnifying glass for Genius Wario. The only one I had an issue activating was Cosmic Wario's, where you're supposed to draw a circle around his head. Almost 75% of the time, I'd draw a circle and either nothing would happen or I'd transform into the wrong thing. Maybe I'm just bad at drawing circles or something, but that consistently gave me trouble throughout my entire playthrough. I also had a bit of trouble with the Arty Wario disguise. Its upgrade lets you infinitely draw hearts to heal yourself with, but a lot of the time it just wouldn't work. Again, maybe I'm just bad at drawing hearts, but it's still an issue that I had. However, those pale in comparison to Wicked Wario. His ability lets you fly upwards and, after it's upgraded, move left and right in midair. But instead of utilizing the touch controls like every other disguise in the game, Wicked Wario has you blow into the microphone to propel him upwards. Now the touch controls mostly have a decent purpose, but this is pure gimmicky garbage. Blowing out my lungs just to make Wario go upwards is not a fun way to play a video game. In a game like Nintendogs, where it uses voice recognition to have your dog remember certain tricks, the microphone serves a unique purpose that couldn't be replicated in any other way. In this case, however, it could have easily been mapped to a button or even some touchscreen action like everything else. In fact, that's really my biggest issue with the controls. Almost every action mapped to the touchscreen could have been pulled off by just pressing a button, and switching disguises could have been done in the pause menu a la Mega Man, or just cycled through with the L and R buttons, which, as is, go completely unused. The only abilities that make good use of the touchscreen controls are Cosmic Wario and Arty Wario. Being able to rapid-fire lasers in any direction is really satisfying and gets used for some pretty clever puzzles later in the game, and being able to draw a block and have it drop right where you draw it on the screen is also really cool. Not to mention it's also put to great use for some puzzles. Other than those, most abilities have a simple attack that could just be activated with a single button press. I wouldn't call the entire control scheme gimmicky, as I understand what they were going for here, and it does have its benefits, but it just feels like a missed opportunity to only have a couple of abilities realize the potential of this control scheme. They could have had more of the attacks home in on where you aim on the screen, so it's more involved than just randomly tapping to do a thing, but as is, it feels like lost potential. Now I do want to stress here that I don't think these controls are bad, nor do I think they are too gimmicky. Like I said, they're mostly responsive and fun to use, and I got used to them fairly quickly, so I don't think anyone should let the unconventional control scheme put them off before they have a chance to get acquainted with them. However, there was room for improvement here, and with games that utilize an unconventional control scheme, I feel it's important to judge them both by what they are and what they could be. If more moves utilize the touchscreen better, the game would have been more engaging and fun to play, but as is, they leave a bit to be desired.
See, I was a bit of a copyright bad boy. Sue me, Daddy Nintendo. And I played this DS game on the PC. That was an experience. And I'm mentioning it here because I know we've got some bad copyright girls and boys in the audience right now. Rad. Honestly, using the mouse wasn't too bad. Like ahbeef said, these controls aren't ideal, but on emulator, never did they prevent me from actually enjoying what was there. Funnily enough, the controls, being as mediocre as they are, serve the level design decently well. Generally speaking, Master of Disguise plays like a cross between a standard 2D platformer and a Metroidvania, where the game is split into different levels that are all fairly large with a substantial amount of backtracking. The Metroid parallels don't end there though, there's a heavy emphasis on exploration and puzzle solving. The top screen is taken up by a map, and you'll often find new abilities to access more parts of the levels as you go. Taking this kind of approach is a neat idea, and it works well in a lot of places, but oftentimes it clashes with the more traditional aspects of 2D platformer design found throughout the game. The game is split into 10 levels, but they all take 30 minutes to an hour to finish, and it can make the game feel like a total slog sometimes. You'll also find yourself generally repeating a lot of set pieces within the levels, but unlike a Metroid game where your new abilities gives new meaning to those old areas, for the most part all your new abilities add here are a slightly different way to attack enemies. Sure, some abilities like Arty Wario can give you new ways to solve puzzles, but most of the time you'll just be running through the same hallways over and over again.
Speaking of Arty Wario, it's probably my favorite disguise in the game. As you play, you'll unlock new disguises and an upgrade for each disguise, and they're implemented fairly well. One thing this game nails is using each different disguise for puzzles within the levels. These puzzles feel like a perfect extension of the puzzle design from Wario Land 4, where you have the different abilities all integrated with environmental objects to make some really fun and satisfying challenges. If I have to nitpick, I'd say the puzzles don't get all of that interesting until around level 4, and one of the puzzles from level 3 is particularly pretty stupid. You have to get 3 treasures for this giant sphinx guy to give you some info, but 2 of them are locked behind a quiz where you're supposed to answer questions based on the exhibits seen throughout the level. The problem with these is that most of the answers are kind of hard to figure out, but you're hardly punished for getting them wrong, and every time you retry it, the question you get is randomly picked. In fact, after failing the second question enough times, I ended up getting the same question that I got for the first one and was able to very easily pass it. The fact that this is even possible seems like quite the oversight. Other than that, the beginning levels of the game do feel a little underwhelming, but that's really only because you start out with one disguise and you unlock the rest of the next 5 levels or so. Once you do have more of them at your disposal, it starts using them in much more creative ways. One of my favorite sequences has to be the race at the end of level 9. You have to get through a little gauntlet of puzzles before Carpaccio does, and you have every ability in the game to work with. It uses them all really well, and after failing a couple of times while learning the layout, I just got more and more motivated, and when I did win the race, it was so satisfying. If I have anything to complain about here, it could have had one or two more rooms to make it a bit more intense. There are plenty of puzzles that test your reflexes with using each of the disguise's different abilities, and the more you have to work with, the more interesting the puzzles get. The result is a game that starts off kinda boring, but gets a lot better around the halfway mark. However, it kinda has a reverse effect when it comes to the treasures. See, these are typically your reward for solving a puzzle within a level, and depending on the type of treasure chest, you'll either get a basic treasure that increases your score, a new disguise or upgrade for an existing disguise, a key item, or an upgrade to your max health. The mandatory ones like disguises and key items are relegated to these purple chests, and the max health upgrades are found in green chests, so the most common ones you'll be seeing are red chests. And they really are common too, these things are fucking everywhere. But there's still a good reward for solving a puzzle. Well, at least they should be, but there's one small problem that gives the treasures that reverse effect I mentioned. And in fact, it's the same problem I had with Wario Land 2. Every chest requires you to beat a minigame to reap its rewards.
I personally couldn't stand these awful minigames. See, these wouldn't be so fucking terrible if they weren't required, but you have to play one for every single chest you open. Imagine completing a kinda fun challenge or puzzle and then having to stop platforming, aka while you even play a Wario game, and instead use the DS's innovative innovations to solve one of the only 8 tedious, unimaginative distractions. These destroy the pacing of the gameplay, which is otherwise pretty enjoyable. None of these mini-games are interesting. All of them are gimmicky trash. And I'm not just being a pissed off, angry, mad lad gamer here. I just could not tolerate playing Color Me Happy and fucking coloring in stupid pictures like a 2-year-old. I'm not 2. I'm a teenager. Ah! Zappy Path gave me flashbacks to that old jump scare game from middle school, which was really not appreciated. Lots of Dots, probably the most egregious example, has you tracing dots again like a fucking preschooler. Do people like these? Do people actually like filling out the back of the kids menu you get at Friendly's? What? A good mini game should be mini, yes, but that doesn't mean it should have the depth of a puddle. Sure, there are 3 difficulties for each of the 8 mini games, but that's 24 variations of short, redundant, boring, tedious garbage. With how many treasures there are to get in the game, you'll have seen every one of them by the 3rd or 4th level.
Being that they aren't required to beat the game, I just stopped bothering with the red chest once I got about halfway through, because I just couldn't stand doing these horrible repetitive minigames anymore. They're way too easy, way too tedious, and seriously lacking in variety. It boggles my mind they would add something that only pads out the gameplay to an already very bloated game. You see, the way these levels are designed are fine for exploration and puzzle solving, especially in later levels, but for basic navigation, and especially 100% completion, it is a bloated nightmare. One level I really disliked, for example, was the Ancient Temple. See, while some levels are fairly straightforward, like Sweatmore Peak, others have doors that take you to what is essentially a second layer of the level, and you can only travel back and forth between each layer by entering a door. This means that you're on basically 2 interconnected levels at once, and you only see the map for the layer that you're on. Navigating these levels can sometimes be a total pain, and level 6 was the absolute worst one for me. I spent over an hour just wandering around, going back and forth through doors and getting lost. It really takes the labyrinthian design just way too far. While not every level is quite this bad, many of them still face similar problems. You're constantly going through the same hallways over and over to find that one path you haven't gotten to yet to get some arbitrary key item. Stopping to solve puzzles on the way can be fun, but when your reward is another fucking minigame, it's best to just not bother unless it's for a green or purple chest. I can't stress enough how boring my first 3 hours with this game were. If it weren't for the excellent story and the better pacing in the latter half of the game, I would have really struggled to finish it. Fortunately though, the second half does get much better, with more interesting puzzles, more mechanics at your disposal, and just better paced level design in general. Level 7 is probably my favorite in the game for being generally pretty straightforward and having a really interesting gimmick. The later levels are much more fun to complete, and if it weren't for the dreadful minigames, I probably would have 100% of the game. While I wouldn't call the level design bad, because like I said, the mechanics are interesting and the pacing gets much better in the second half, it can be a boring slog for the first few hours, so in all, I'm pretty mixed on it.
Well, I'll tell you something I'm not too mixed on, the bosses, and ahbeef agrees.
Definitely.
Alright, so these are definitely the highlight of the gameplay, and even Wario Master of Disguise entirely. Maybe aside from the entertaining story, they have a bit of a weak start, with the first two being fights against Cannoli's mechs and the third just being more quiz questions, but like the rest of the gameplay, they get a lot more interesting once you have more disguises in your arsenal. The fight against Carpaccio is really cool, with you having to constantly switch between the different disguises to find the right ball to shoot, shooting the giant ball, getting rid of the ice spikes, and attacking him by drawing a block on top of the lights in the center. You have to do all of that and dodge lasers and other oncoming attacks. It's insanely hectic, and the amazing music only makes it that much more frantic. The fifth boss is really visually interesting. His shirtlessness paired with white undies just makes my onion go wow wow, if you feel me. Generally too, I love the aesthetic of the bosses. Cannoli's looking like an Italian snack. Carpaccio is also neat, and each of the bosses have some unique flair to them. Even Echo the Dolphin's aborted sister, which we'll get to later, has a neat design with this pink hair and crown on top. Its exaggerated facial expressions, something other bosses also share, are the icing on this well-designed boss cake. Anyways, back to boss 5. You have to roast the Pharaoh's underwear, which is my idea of a good Friday night. You switch between Cosmic, Genius, and Dragon to do the deed, which all works seamlessly with dodging and attacking the dang guy. The sixth boss, Kabloom, is one of the best in the game, with a lot of variety with different attacks and a really cool gimmick using these seesaws seen earlier in the level to get up high enough to attack the boss. Barfatronic Lava Chompter, which is a fucking amazing name, isn't the most difficult thing in the world. He's actually kind of easy for this late in the game. However, his visual gags of having a toilet in his mouth and using his tongue to finger a rope is just so funny to me. Sure, he's kind of repetitive if you boil down how each of the disguises are interwoven into the fight, but I still don't find him boring to go up against. The boss of the 8th level, Stuffy the 64th, is unfortunately the worst in the level. When he dolphin dives out of the water, you have to use the Genius disguise to punch him in different ways depending on the phase of the fight, usually in tandem with hitting some sort of switch. He also creates little mini dolphins that shoot at you from the air, which you can use a number of disguises to dispatch, but there's also a little body of water below you. If you get sucked into the current and don't switch to Pirate Wario fast enough, you'll get sucked into the current and dragged all the way back to the beginning. When this happens, you have to restart the entire fight, which is split up into 3 phases. It wouldn't really be as big of an issue if it weren't for all the waiting you have to do in this fight. Once you figure out you can very easily just stand in one spot and shoot enemies down with Cosmic Wario and just switch to Genius when he dives out, you end up doing a lot of waiting around. Having to start all the way over from the final phase is beyond aggravating. It's the only really annoying boss in the game though, the rest are still great. At the beginning of chapter 9 is a mini boss fight with Cannoli's final mech, which is pretty cool. It's fun to use all the abilities you've gathered throughout your adventure to get around his big ol' punching thing and kill him. Now, Carpaccio's race comes after, which is a pretty neat way to end the second to last bit of Master of Disguise. It's an interesting change of pace compared to just forcefully overcoming an evil dude, but we've already gone in depth about that, so,
The final boss, Tiramisu. Now, Haedox, like the big funny idiot he is, didn't see the twist of Tiramisu being the ultimate villain coming. Regardless, after learning of her new plan to eat a bunch of souls or whatever, Cannoli flies in out of nowhere to save both you and Carpaccio from her strike. They escape, leaving you to defeat her, and the atmosphere is incredibly intense. It was already built up really well from the cutscene at the beginning of the level, and the music during the boss fight just pushes that intensity even higher. The actual fight itself, however, is comparatively underwhelming. Instead of rapidly switching between different disguises like most of the other bosses, Tiramisu is split up into 3 phases, the first requiring you to switch between Genius and Pirate Wario, and the following 2 requiring you to only use Cosmic Wario and Dragon Wario respectively. The first phase is decent enough, and the second phase has this neat idea of having you angle your shots with Cosmic Wario to hit all 3 squares that pop up with one beam. But the last phase just has you attack the core with Dragon Wario and then sit on the side to wait out some attacks. It's a pretty boring and anticlimactic final phase, but stomping on her head to land the final blow is admittedly pretty satisfying. With Tiramisu defeated, she's sealed back into the Wish Stone. Wario's about to make his wish when Good Style suddenly transforms into a wizard. He reveals to Wario that he is Cannoli the First, the man who came across the demon in the desert all those years ago. He tricked her into giving him his powers and sealed her away in the Wish Stone, but had to shed his human form to do so. He had been keeping the pieces of the Wish Stone apart for years, but chose to help Wario put them together so that he could help him defeat the demon for good. As a reward, and as an apology for lying to Wario, Goodstyle promises Wario all the treasure his family of thieves have stolen over the generations. Wario bathes in his riches for a short while before taking them back home, but due to a malfunction in his helmet, his newfound fortune is left in the TV world. The ending is pretty funny, with Wario freaking out over his treasure being ripped away from him, and while the game may end on a sour note for Wario, he still is an anti-hero, so it doesn't end up feeling unsatisfying or anything like that. As a bonus, beating the game unlocks 5 challenge levels where you have to run through previous levels under a time limit to raise Cannoli to all the treasures in the level. It's a pretty decent bit of post-game content, but I didn't bother playing more than one level. They aren't nearly as long as the regular levels, so they serve as a pretty decent time trial mode.
And I think that just about does it. All in all, I think Wario has grown on me. Master of Disguise is also pretty good. Better than I felt while playing the game. See, during my playthrough, I was a bit of an angry gamer and had a hard time getting used to the controls. The mini games felt boring and I said, ahbeef, this game está stinko, or some stupid shit like that. But eventually something just clicked and I came to enjoy the rad boss music, the funny narrative, the true to Wario platforming, and glorious visuals. I don't know, but I don't think this game deserves the overwhelming negativity it's garnered. Sure, the touch controls are meh, the mini games are dreadful, and all the cons we've discussed before are, cons. Despite that, I was still glad I got to experience the game. It was a good, 9 hours. Is it the best Wario game? Nah, I think Wario Land 4 still holds that title for me, but Master of Disguise is actually good, I'd say. What do you think, Epic ahbeef?
Personally, I'm still kind of mixed on the whole thing. The game is filled with tedium and repetition, and the level structure just feels confused. On one hand, you have typical 2D platforming conventions like individual levels, baddies to fight, and some puzzle platforming, but on the other hand, you have level design not out of place in a Metroidvania. The result is a game that has some sort of identity crisis. It wants to do a bunch of different things at once without thinking about how to mix them together without them clashing. If the game had fully committed to an open-world Metroidvania design, it could have been much more engaging and interesting, but as is, they just don't do enough with it. That said, there are things I really like about this game, such as the core mechanics, puzzle design, bosses, music, and especially the story, but it's kind of overshadowed by a very bloated level structure. It's honestly a shame, because I love the setting of this game and feel that it had a lot of potential, but the game we got is instead kind of a mixed bag. I can really appreciate the things this game does right, but when it fails kinda hard. All in all, it's definitely not the worst game in the series and deserves more credit than its reputation has offered it, but I'd hesitate to call it any more than slightly above average. Would I recommend this game? That's a bit of a tough question to answer. If you like 2D platformers and or Metroidvanias and have enough patience for it, I can give it a cautious recommendation. If you're going to play it though, try and stick it out to the end of the game. I feel like most people got bored with it around the halfway mark and never gave the game a fair chance to really improve, creating the more negative general consensus the game has. There's a good amount of stuff to appreciate here, and most of it is found in the second half of the game. If the footage you've seen throughout this review interests you, I'd say go for it, but if you're gonna play this game, I definitely recommend going physical. The Wii U Virtual Console version isn't a terrible option if playing on an original DS cartridge isn't available to you, but playing with a considerably lighter DS is much more comfortable than the big clunky Wii U gamepad. With that said, I'd like to thank my buddy Haedox for joining me on this review.
Fuck off.
Alright, well if you want to check out Haedox's channel, I'll leave a link to Haedox vs Skylanders in the description, so I'm sure he'll enjoy a big sub boost from that. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video for the finale of the marathon, Wario World for the GameCube. Before you guys go, I do want to mention I now have a Patreon account. This is the first main video where I'm mentioning this, so thank you to my patrons on the screen right now. And if you want to be a patron, link on the screen and in the description, and yeah, you don't have to be a patron. You'll still get access to all my content. The main stuff you'll be seeing there is just like posts, updating, behind the scenes stuff, pretty small stuff, but yeah, anyway, that's a thing. Patreon plug, yeah. Alright, thank you, bye.
Hello?